That evening, when Han Lu came home, she placed those jjigaangru on the dining table. I was in the kitchen cooking noodles. The water had boiled. I put the dried noodles in, stirred them with chopsticks to keep them from sticking. Steam from the pot hit my face and fogged up my glasses. I reached up, took them off, and set them on the counter. Squinting, I watched the noodles tumble in the boiling water. Han Lu's voice came from the living room. Jiang Chung, come here for a second. I turned down the heat, wiped my hands, and walked out. She had placed a few sheets of A4 paper under the glass top of the dining table. She stood beside it with her arms crossed, her expression hard to read. The sunset outside the window outlined her profile in a dark reddish glow. I got closer before I could make out the words. Internal layoff notice. The signature line read Human Resources. The stamp was real, your department's being cut. Han Lu's tone was flat, like she was relaying a weather forecast. Shindong finally couldn't hold out anymore. StarTech already signed the letter of intent. The acquisition closes next month. Your tech division is the first to go. I bent down, flipped the notice over, and looked at the back. Printed on the reverse was the standard template, an employee assistance hotline, and some boilerplate. I straightened up. What about severance? Han Lu glanced at me, her brow furrowing slightly. I knew that looked too well. She always made it when she thought I wasn't taking things seriously enough. A vertical line formed between her eyebrows, her lips pressed to one side, like she was holding something in. I asked HR on your behalf. She said, best they can do is 3 months' pay. You won't even get N+1. Company's accounts are empty. 8 years you put in, and in the end you can't even get a decent severance package. I turned back toward the kitchen. Her voice chased after me. That's all you've got? Oh, Jiang Chung, you just got fired. 8 years. Kicked out the door. And all you say is, oh, I went back to the stove, turned the burner back on, stuck my chopsticks in the pot, and stirred. The noodles had softened. I fished them out, rinsed them in cold water, and divided them into 2 bowls. I added extra scallions to one, carried it to the table, and set it in front of her. I took the other and sat across from her. Han Lu stood by the table, not sitting, looking down at me eating. I took a few bites, looked up, and asked, aren't you eating? It'll get mushy if you let it sit. I'm not hungry. She sat down across from me, hands folded on the table. That posture suddenly made the distance between us feel like several office cubicles. Jiang Chung, what are you going to do? Look for a job first. You're 35. Tech positions don't look kindly on that age. And you've never managed a team. No experience in tech management. She ticked the points off one by one, her tone like she was doing career planning for a colleague. Precise, calm, no emotion. I can ask around to see if any of the competitors have openings. But honestly, 8 years at the same company with no promotions. The people above will think you're not capable. I took another bite of noodles. Chewed. Swallowed. Han Lu, do you think I'm not capable? She paused. Just a beat. But for someone I'd lived with for 7 years. That pause said more than any words she could have spoken. I think you don't fight. She finally said, you were at that company for 8 years. Shinbonian is your father's friend, isn't he? You could have just asked him for a good position. You didn't. You said you wanted to live by your skills. But tech changes every year. How are you supposed to compete with fresh graduates? Now the company's gone under. You've got nothing. What exactly were you holding out for? I put down my chopsticks, drank the rest of the soup from the bowl, stood up and wiped my mouth. Tomorrow, I'll go ask the chairman how the compensation should be handled. I said. Han Lu stared for a second, then let out a short, breathy laugh. You're going to see Shinbonian. He sold the company. Where is he going to get money for your compensation? He's your father's friend. Sure, but business is business. He can barely take care of himself right now. You really think Shindong isn't chairman anymore? I said. She looked at me. What do you mean? The acquirer is StarTech. Signing tomorrow. The new chairman will be there. I took my jacket off the back of the chair and put it on. I'm going to ask the new chairman. Han Lu leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, looking at me like I'd suddenly started speaking in tongues. Underneath that expression was confusion, and beneath that, something I couldn't quite name. Like she'd never really known the man who'd sat across from her at dinner for 8 years. You know StarTech's chairman? She asked. Sort of. What do you mean, sort of? Does he know you? You're just a laid-off bottom-tier tech. Used to. I pulled the door open. You'll find out tomorrow. I stepped out. The hallway light flicked on behind me, then off. I walked down the stairs at a steady pace, each step landing with a dull thud on the concrete. The stairwell had that old building mustiness, mixed with the smell of braised ribs from downstairs. I walked out through the unit door, The early April night breeze wasn't cold anymore, soft against my face. I stopped under a streetlight and pulled out my phone. Scrolled to a number I'd saved 3 years ago and never once dialed. The screen light washed over my face. The name, Jiang Hongyan, glowing quietly in my contacts. I moved my thumb to the call button and pressed it, held the phone to my ear. It rang twice, then picked up. The voice on the other end sounded older than I remembered from 3 years ago, but that deep, settled weight, the kind carved by 60-plus years of living, was still there. Jiang Cheng. He said, it's me. I paused. Dad. The line went quiet for 2 seconds. Then his voice came through again, with a faint tremble, like sand scraping against his throat. You finally said it. Signings tomorrow. I'll be there. I said, but I have a condition. Name it. I don't want any official position. I go in as a technical consultant. You follow your process. No special treatment. He was silent for a long moment. Then, that won't work. You're my dad. I cut him off. I haven't called you that in 35 years. I've lived off my own work my whole life. Let me finish this. The one thing I've held on to. After that, we can talk about everything else. The line went silent for a long time. Then he said, you're like your mother. Stubborn. Hard-headed. But I like it. See you tomorrow. See you tomorrow. I hung up. The streetlight cast a halo of light around my feet. I looked down at my shadow for a moment. It wore a plain dark gray jacket. My hair was a little long. The light stretched me out long and thin on the gray cement. Like a stroke of ink. I turned and walked back inside. Upstairs, Han Lu had finished her noodles. The bowl sat in the sink. She was on the couch scrolling through her phone. I passed through the living room on my way to the study. She didn't look up. Where'd you go? Just walked around outside. Figured it out yet. Going to see Shin Banian tomorrow. No. I pushed the study door halfway open and looked back at her. Her eyes were still glued to her phone, thumb swiping idly. Her expression was blank. I told you. I said, tomorrow. I'm asking the chairman. She finally looked up, gave me a glance. Whatever. You never listen to me anyway. She went back to her phone. I walked into the study and closed the door. Opened my computer. Pulled up the email Jiang Hongyan had sent 3 years ago when he first reached out. I'd never opened the attachment. This time, I clicked it. Inside was StarTech's organizational chart, a core business overview, and a note. Child, I'm your father. I looked for you and your mother for 30 years. Your mother won't see me, but can you let me at least see you? You don't have to do anything. Just let me see how you're doing. I closed the email and leaned back. The night sky outside was layered in shades of orange-gray from the city lights. On the distant overpass, taillights traced a flowing line of red. I thought of my mother. She passed last winter. Lung cancer. Before she went, she held my hand and said her last words. Find your father. He's waited 30 years for you. Your mother has no regrets. Except that I never let you call him Dad. I called him. But he was thousands of miles away on the other end of a phone line. He still hadn't seen me standing in front of him, saying those 2 words in person. Tomorrow. He would. The next morning. I woke at 7. Han Lu had already washed up and was heating milk in the kitchen. I went into the bathroom, shaved, and pulled out the dark gray suit I'd hung in the back of the closet, the one I'd worn once on our wedding day, and never touched again. Han Lu poked her head out from the kitchen and saw me in that suit. Her brow twitched. You're wearing that. Where are you going? The signing ceremony. When did you buy this? She stepped closer, eyeing the fabric. This material isn't cheap. Wedding day. She paused, studied me for a moment. You never wore it before. Never had a reason. She didn't ask again. I straightened my tie, wiped my shoes, and grabbed my briefcase. As I reached the door, she called after me. Coming back for dinner tonight. Don't know yet. I'll call you. Find out. I went downstairs and hailed a cab. The driver glanced at me in the rear view. Probably figured a guy in a suit at 7:30 a.m. heading downtown was just another commuter. Didn't ask. I leaned back and watched the city slowly wake up outside the window. Steam rose from breakfast stalls. Buses pulled into stops. People on scooters zipped past wrapped in windbreakers. The city looked the same as yesterday, as it had for the past 8 years. But today, it was different. Completely different. A red carpet was rolled out in front of the Feyua Technology Building. 8 years ago, when I first came here for an interview, it hadn't looked this impressive. Shin Banian received me in a shabby second-floor office, pushing a cup of tea across the table in a ceramic mug and saying, Your father says you've got skills. I trust him. 8 years later, the ceramic mug was replaced by a glass cup. The second floor had moved to the 10th. Today, this building no longer bore the Shun name. I got out of the car and saw the electronic screen in the lobby displaying a banner. Major announcement. StarTech acquisition of Feiyue Technology signing ceremony to be held today at 10 a.m. A few staff members in uniform stood beneath the screen, staring up, murmuring among themselves that I walked through the revolving doors. The receptionist looked at my suit, then at my face. She hesitated. Sir, do you have an appointment? Jiang Cheng. I said, Tech Department. Here for the signing ceremony. She checked something on her computer, and her expression shifted. Her tone became noticeably more polite. Mr. Jiang, please take the elevator to the 10th floor. I nodded and headed for the elevator. Just as the doors were about to close, a hand slipped in and stopped them. The doors reopened. Han Lu stood outside. She was wearing HR's standard navy suit today. Her hair was pinned up. She'd put on light professional makeup. When she saw me inside the elevator, her face froze like someone had hit pause. What are you doing here? She stared. I stepped aside to make room. The doors closed. The cab began to rise. She stood beside me, and that familiar perfume drifted over, the same scent I'd caught every morning in the hallway for 8 years. I'm here for the signing ceremony. I said, you? For the signing ceremony. You've been laid off. Your access badge was deactivated yesterday. The elevator reached the 10th floor. The doors opened. Outside was a red-carpeted hallway lined with staff in black uniforms. When they saw me, they gave a synchronized nod. Mr. Jiang, this way, please. Han Lu stood frozen in the elevator. I stepped out. The staff guided me forward. I took 2 steps, then stopped and turned back to look at her. Her hand was still on the door open button. She was rigid. Her expression looked like she was standing in front of a stranger. Han Lu. I said, I told you. Today, I'm asking the chairman. I gestured down the hall toward the open conference room doors. The chairman's in there. Inside, people were already seated. The signing table was draped in dark blue velvet. 2 name cards sat side by side. One read Shinbonian. The other read Jiang Hongyan. The chairman's right there. I said, do you want to come with me? Her lips parted. Her throat made a sound. Something caught. Half strangled. The elevator doors began to close behind her. But she didn't let go. They popped back open. She stood in the cab, that navy suit making her face look pale as paper. Jiang Hongyan. She finally managed. StarTech's chairman. What is he to you? Someone called my name from the conference room. I glanced over and acknowledged them, then turned back to her. Elevator light washed across her face. I watched what was in her eyes shift from confusion to shock, and from shock to something else, like she'd just stepped onto a stair that wasn't there. He's my father. I said. I turned and walked toward the conference room. Behind me, the elevator doors finally closed with a soft thud. The signing ceremony was shorter than I'd expected. Shinbonian sat on the right side of the table, Jiang Hongyan on the left. I sat in the front row, against the wall, with a technical consultant nameplate the staff had added last minute. When Shinbonian finished signing, he looked up and across the table, past the crowd, and gave me a small nod. His eyes held something. A relief. Like, finally, we're here. Jiang Hongyan signed. He held the pen for a beat longer than necessary before setting it down. He stood, shook Shinbonian's hand. Cameras flashed. Reporters asked questions. Assistants shuffled papers. It was as orderly as any acquisition ceremony. Then Shinbonian stepped back, gave up the microphone, and faced the room. One last thing. Allow me, as founder of Feiyue Technology, to make one final personnel announcement. The room went quiet. Shinbonian's gaze crossed the room and landed on me. He cleared his throat. His voice wasn't loud, but every word was crisp. After consultation with StarTech, Feiyue Technology's new chief executive officer will be Mr. Jiang Cheng, formerly technical director of Feiyue Technology. Mr. Jiang has worked here for 8 years. No one understands our technical systems better than he does. I trust him. The rest was drowned out by the wave of noise that hit. Applause. Startled murmurs. A few familiar faces with their jaws dropped. I stood up, walked to the stage, and shook Shinbonian's hand. His palm was dry and firm. As he leaned in, he murmured, Your father made me announce it last. Said it wouldn't look right coming from him. Uncle Shun. Thank you. Don't thank me. He patted my shoulder. You hid this from me for 8 years. We'll talk about that later. I stood on the stage, facing rows of faces. Mostly old colleagues from Feiyue. I saw the tech engineers in the back, jaws practically on the floor. I saw the accountant from finance who'd nodded at me in the hallway 100 times, but never said a word, eyes wide as saucers. I saw PR people furiously typing. Probably updating everyone not in the room. But my gaze swept the crowd and stopped at the last row. Near the door, Han Lu was standing. She hadn't sat down. She looked like a tree that had just been transplanted, roots not yet in the ground. Suspended, floating. Her face still had that pale, off-balance look. Her hand gripped her bag strap, knuckles white, lips pressed tight. Her eyes cut through the air of the entire conference room and fixed on me. There was so much churning in them. Confusion, shock, disbelief, and something else, something that had been buried for a long time and now clawed its way to the surface. Anger. What are you standing there for? She used to ask me that all the time. Every time she came home late from work and saw me in the study, staring at a screen until late, she'd frown and say it. Back then, I'd say I was debugging. She'd say debugging until the end of time wouldn't make money. Now she was standing at the doorway of the 10th floor conference room, watching me take the CEO appointment on stage. And finally, she wasn't asking what I was standing there for, because the answer was clear to everyone in the room. After the ceremony, the crowd dispersed. A few reporters cornered me with questions. Mr. Jiang, what's your relationship with Mr. Jiang Hongyan? Why did you keep your identity hidden for 8 years? How do you plan to integrate the two companies' tech resources? I gave the standard answer. PR will handle everything later. I slipped through the crowd and ran into Shun Bonian in the hallway. He was leaning against the wall, smoking. When he saw me, he stubbed out the cigarette and waved me over. Your father's in the lounge. He nodded toward the end of the hall. Go. He's been nervous all day. He's nervous. Don't you get it? Shun Bonian waved a hand. 30+ years without seeing his son. First time you're standing in front of him. He's afraid you hate him. The way you spoke on stage, he got red-eyed listening. You two are carved from the same block of stubbornness. I walked toward the lounge at the end of the hall. My hand paused on the doorknob for a second. Then I pushed it open. Jiang Hongyan stood by the window. Back to the door. He wore a crisp black suit. Straight posture. Hair neatly combed. From behind, he didn't look like a man pushing 70. He heard the door and turned. His face looked the same as it had in the video call 3 years ago. It just with deeper lines at the corners of his eyes and more silver at his temples. He watched me walk in. His mouth moved, like he wanted to speak. But what came out first wasn't words. It was a long, held breath. Jiang Chung, he said. Dad. He stepped toward me, then stopped, raised his hand halfway, hesitated, and finally brought it down on my shoulder. A pat. The warmth of his palms seeped through the suit jacket. A steady, firm pressure, different from Shun Bonian's old friend Pat. His hand was sinewy, the pressure careful, like he was afraid pressing too hard might break something fragile. You look like your mother, he said. Yet he pulled his hand back, turned, and picked up a document from the desk, handed it to me. It was the official CEO appointment letter for Feiyue Technology. Stamped. Signed. I flipped through it. He added, on the technical side, change whatever you want. On operations, you have full authority. After the acquisition process closes, finance will coordinate. Dad. I closed the document and looked at him. I'm not here to take over your empire. He looked at me. I worked at this company for 8 years. I said, in those 8 years, I didn't use your name, your connections, or mention my background to anyone. I did what I could, as well as I could. Today, you gave me this position. I'll take it, because I earned it, not because I'm your son. Jiang Hongyan listened quietly. Behind those eyes, weathered by 6 decades of life, I saw something complex. Pride, perhaps, and something else. An apology, softened by time. He nodded. Then what do you want? I thought for a moment. I want you to tell me why you left. He was silent for a few seconds. Then, tonight, I'll take you to dinner. We'll talk. Deal. I walked out of the lounge. Han Lu was standing at the other end of the hallway. She wasn't talking to anyone, just standing there, phone in hand, screen lit. But she wasn't looking at it. When she saw me come out, she walked over and stopped in front of me. Oh, you have a minute? She asked. Point 5. She glanced at me, then nodded toward an empty meeting room nearby. I followed her in. She closed the door. Not all the way, leaving a crack. She leaned against the wall by the door, turning her phone over in her hands a couple of times. Then she spoke. Jiang Hongyan is your father. Yes. Biological. Biological. When did you find out? Point 3 years ago. Before my mother passed. She closed her eyes, took a breath. When she opened them again, her voice was steadier. So you kept it from me for 3 years. 3 years. Every morning you went to work, came home for dinner, sat in the study fiddling with code on weekends. You never said a word. Yes. Why did I look into her eyes? Her eyeliner was fine today. Her lipstick was a cool rose shade. The one she wore for work. Her pupils were dark, slightly trembling, like ripples on a lake touched by wind, because everything in my life I carried alone. I said, The person you got together with. You liked that version of me. The one who carried everything himself. If I told you my biological father was worth billions, would you have seen me the same way? Her lips pressed together. She didn't answer. Han Lu. I stood on that stage today because I earned it, not because Jiang Hongyan is my father. If you think I'm just some princeling who got handed a job, then you've underestimated me. She stood there for a moment, then turned her head to look out the window. Outside, the sky had cleared. Sunlight streamed through the blinds, slicing bars of gold across the gray floor tiles. She stood in those bars, her profile cut into segments by the alternating light and shadow. That you've always been like this, she said, her voice lower now. You keep everything close to your chest. The good things, the bad things, that you never bring them out. Did you ever ask me to bring them out? She turned back to look at me. The distance between us was just a few steps, but it felt longer. She looked at me for a long time. Then she said, I'm sorry. I thought I'd misheard. I said I'm sorry. She said it again, clearer this time. I always thought you were unmotivated. I always thought you were the one dragging us down. Every time you came home late, I complained you didn't make enough. Every time you got passed over for promotion, I thought, why doesn't he fight harder? I didn't know what you were carrying. Now you do? Now I do. She nodded. But I don't think I know enough. From now on, can you let me know more? I looked at her. She stood in those slashes of light, the edge of her navy skirt catching a pale glow. Her fingers were no longer gripping her bag strap. They hung loose at her sides. Her posture was softer. Okay, I said. She didn't say anything else. I turned and walked out. The hallway was bright, sunlight making me squint. In the distance, staff were packing up the ceremony. The signing table was folded and wheeled away. The blue velvet was taken down and boxed. Feiyue Technologies' old nameplate still hung on the wall, but beside it was a new line. A StarTech company. I stood in the hallway looking at that sign. Something in my chest settled, like a stone falling into place. 87 that evening, Jiang Hongyan took me to a Huayong restaurant on the west side. Small, tastefully decorated, intimate. It seemed like a regular spot for him. Just the two of us in the private room. 6 dishes were served. He ate slowly, each bite deliberate. As he ate, he talked. 30 years ago, how he'd been framed for debt, how he fled, how he rebuilt himself from selling boxed lunches on the street, how it took him over a decade to build StarTech into what it was. His tone was flat. No self-pity, just facts. Like reading an archived document. When I found your mother, you were already in high school. He put a piece of steamed perch in my bowl. She refused to see me. Sent someone with a message. I raised the boy myself. You don't need to worry about him. Run your business. Don't bother us. And you listened. I did. He set down his chopsticks and leaned back in his chair. Because I thought she was right. I'd been gone for over a decade. Why did I have to come back and claim anything? I looked down at the fish in my bowl. White flesh. Light brown sauce. Steaming faintly. Dad, I said. I don't hate you. He looked at me. The warm light in the private room caught a faint glint in his eyes. Moisture. He blinked away quickly. I know, he said. But I can't just act like we've never been apart either. I know. Take your time. I've waited 30 years for you. I can wait a few more, after dinner. He offered to have his driver take me home. I said no. I'd take a cab. He stood at the restaurant entrance for a moment, watching me flag down a ride. The night breeze stirred the hem of his suit. He stood straight-backed, white-haired but still strong. As I settled into the back of the cab, I looked back through the window. He raised a hand in a small wave. The car pulled away. In the rearview mirror, his figure grew smaller and smaller, until a turn swallowed him from sight. I leaned back in my seat and reached into my pocket. Felt the key. The one to Feiyue Technologies' CEO office, given to me by Shun Bonian that afternoon. Brass, clean teeth. I looked at it for a moment, then closed my hand around it. Outside, the city lights burned on. Day 1. I slid the key into the lock of Feiyue Technologies' CEO office. The door swung open. The decor was still Shinbonian style. Mahogany desk, leather swivel chair, a calligraphy scroll on the back wall reading "Heaven rewards the diligent." I walked to the window and pulled the blinds wide. Sunlight flooded in, brightening the whole room. The desk was spotless. Someone had cleaned ahead of time. A computer, a pen holder, and a prepared employee directory were all that sat on it. I sat down and powered on the computer. The temporary password set by IT worked. I changed it to my own. Then I pulled up Feiyue's financial data from the past 3 years. The employee roster, project progress records. Bits of this information had lived in fragments in my head for 8 years. Now I could see the full picture. An hour later, I closed the financial pages. The company's accounts were indeed empty. Receivables were holding things up, but the debt structure was actually fairly healthy. Not as dire as Shinbonian had made it look. He'd probably played up the desperation to push the acquisition price down. Old Fox always had a backup. The personnel section made me pause longer. Operations Director Zhao Wei had received top performance ratings for 3 consecutive years. Beneath them were a dozen notes, point 1 in Shinbonian's own handwriting. Competent, but questionable. Questionable. Shinbonian's handwriting was thin. Those 2 words were pressed harder than the rest. I stared at them for a few seconds, then pulled up Zhao Wei's resume. He joined 5 years ago. Previously a regional manager at a StarTech competitor. Had brought a few clients with him when he jumped ship. Over the years, he'd handled a fair number of procurement projects. I scanned the vendor list. A few names were unfamiliar, registered out of state. I screenshotted them and saved them to an encrypted folder. Then I closed it. Second order of business. I had my assistant pull the full tech department roster. 37 people. 21 I knew. 16 were newer hires from the past 2 years. Of the 21 I knew, 7 had received layoff notices last week, including me. But that notice was void now. They should have already received the internal memo putting it on hold. Day 3. I called a full department meeting for the tech team. The conference room wasn't big enough. 37 people packed in. Some sat on the windowsills. Some leaned against the walls. When I walked in, the atmosphere was thick. Like everyone was measuring me with their eyes, waiting to see how this crown prince would open. A few old colleagues looked friendly enough, but among the newer ones, a guy with ash-gray dyed hair was staring straight at me with a look that practically burned. Who the hell do you think you are? I had no notes, no PowerPoint. I walked to the whiteboard, picked up a marker, and wrote 3 words. Refactoring targets. I know what you're all thinking. I turned to face them. 8 years as technical director. Never promoted. Suddenly CEO. You think it's nepotism? Silence. The ash-gray-haired guy straightened up a little. Nepotism is true. I said. My father is Jiang Hongyan. The buyer. If I denied it, you'd think I was even more fake. But let me show you what I did in those 8 years as technical director. I connected my computer to the projector. Pulled up the core code base from Feiyue's last 6 years. But not the production version. I showed a refactored optimization framework I'd extracted from an old snapshot 6 months ago. A version I'd been working on intermittently for 2 years. Every night in my study, while Han Lu complained I wasn't getting anywhere. I'd been building this. The screen rolled through line after line of code, then switched to comparison charts. Old runtime efficiency, new runtime efficiency, resource usage, response times. Every metric was better. I wrote this myself. I turned back to them. Took me 2 years and 7 months. Off the clock. You can check the commit history. The account is my personal email, not company affiliated. Silence. One of the older colleagues leaned in to study the details, then murmured something to the person next to him. The ash-gray-haired guy stared at the screen for a long time. Then he pulled out his phone and took a picture. When he looked at me again, the "who the hell do you think you are" had faded, replaced by something more like, okay, maybe he can actually code. Starting today, Feiyue's technical architecture is getting refactored. This framework is the foundation. Each of you gets a module. Questions? Bring them up. Changes? We discuss them. I don't run a dictatorship. Technology decisions are made by people who understand technology. I put down the remote. Whoever wants to stay, stay. Whoever doesn't, I'll arrange a transfer or clean termination. Severance at N+1. Company accounts are empty, but I'll cover it from my personal account. A few seconds of silence. Then the ash-gray-haired guy raised his hand. Mr. Jiang. I looked at the framework. There's a part in the distributed scheduling that I have an optimization idea. Go ahead. He stood up, walked to the whiteboard, grabbed a marker, and drew a flowchart under refactoring targets. He drew fast, with some nervous tremor in his fingers. But the logic was clear. He marked 3 spots, then turned to me. These 3 use traditional locking mechanisms. If we switch to lock-free queues, theoretically, we could shave another 8% off response time. I looked at his diagram for 2 seconds. Then I walked over, picked up a red marker, and circled one of his marks. Here, your lock-free queue idea is viable, but it'll require changing the underlying data structure. You're in charge of that section. Prototype in 1 week. He blinked. Deal. He sat back down. People around him started murmuring. A few leaned over to look at his diagram. A marker got passed to a 3rd person, then a 4th. Before long, the whiteboard was covered in colored lines and optimization paths from a dozen different hands. I stepped back to the window and watched 37 people crowding around a whiteboard, arguing. Someone slapped the table. Your approach has data consistency issues. Someone else pulled up a paper on their phone for reference. Someone laughed. Small, but real, like a faucet that had been twisted shut for too long. Finally turned, and water was flowing. About 40 minutes later, they'd hammered out a preliminary framework on their own. The ash-gray-haired guy stepped back, looked at the board, and turned to me. Mr. Jiang, can you approve this? Formalize it in a document. I'll sign. He smiled. The first crack I'd seen in that face. Like ice splitting. Water beneath it. The meeting broke up, and people filed out. I leaned by the window, gathering the markers from the whiteboard. Someone walked up and stood beside me. I glanced over. Han Lu. She stood there holding a cup of coffee, like she'd come from the break room and just happened to pass by. But I knew she hadn't. She'd been standing outside the glass-walled conference room for at least 20 minutes. Since the moment the ash-gray-haired guy had stood up to draw on the board, she'd watched the whole thing. The hours you used to spend in the study until 2 in the morning. You were writing that. She nodded toward the screen with the code framework. Yeah. You never told me that. If I had, you would have said, what's the point? It doesn't make money. She was quiet for a moment. Then, softly, I would have said that before, and now. She set her coffee cup on the windowsill, turning her head to look outside. The sunlight caught her profile. The line of her jaw was softer than usual. Now I think those nights weren't wasted. That I didn't answer. She didn't say anything else. She picked up her coffee and walked away. The sound of her heels faded down the hallway. I looked down at the whiteboard that covered in colorful lines, fresh marker strokes gleaming in the window light. 37 people had left their marks here. Some neat, some messy, some half overwritten, but still visible beneath. This was the tech department I'd worked with for 8 years. They'd been treated like dead weight, cut first in any layoff. But they could draw things like this. They didn't lack ability. They lacked a place to use it. I stood there looking at that board. A solid feeling settled in my chest. Different from sitting in the CEO's office signing documents. Different from standing on the stage listening to applause. Older, quieter, like the feeling when, late at night, after hammering away at code for hours, a module finally runs. Green indicator light flickering on. I knew I was on the right path. Even if more trouble waited ahead, the direction was right. Pace didn't matter. My phone buzzed. A message from Shinbonian. Heard you spent the morning stirring things up in tech. Lively. I replied. Just getting started. He sent back a thumbs up emoji. Then, Zhao Wei. Keep an eye on him. He's been moving a bit too much lately. I stared at moving a bit too much for a few seconds. Then locked the phone. Put the markers back in the pen holder. Zhao Wei. Operations Director. The questionable one in Shinbonian's notes. I thought about those unfamiliar vendor names on his resume. The clients he'd brought when he jumped ship. Were they still around? Still working with him? One thing at a time, but not too slow. Either.as. I left the conference room. I ran into Zhao Wei in the hallway. He wore a navy blue shirt, neatly pressed hair, a crisp smile, the default mask of a capable mid-level manager. He stepped aside, nodded, and said, Mr. Jiang, congratulations. Thanks, Mr. Zhao. We passed each other. A few steps later, I glanced back. He'd already turned into his office at the end of the hall. The door closed. Light shone through the crack. Bright and quiet. I looked away and walked toward my own office. My footsteps were steady on the floor. I knew those eyes were watching from behind. I didn't turn around. The investigation into Zhao Wei. I kept quiet. 8 years in the tech department. I knew the company's underlying systems better than anyone. Data flows, approval paths, permission architectures. The stuff that looked proper on the surface often had cracks underneath that only system administrators could see. I pulled 2 years' worth of procurement orders signed by Zhao Wei. Ran a vendor association analysis through the database backend. Took 3 days. It turned up 7 suppliers. Similar registration dates. Same office building for their registered addresses. Legal representatives with cross-shareholding ties. One of them, named Ruiqing Materials, had a legal rep named Lu Min. The phone number on its business registration. When I checked the area code matched Zhao Wei's wife's hometown. I screenshotted that lead. Didn't touch it. Kept digging. Then I found the 2 traceable instances of kickbacks. One purchase order from last fall. Ruiqing Materials won a bid for server parts at nearly 40% above market price. Under normal circumstances, that kind of price gap would have been flagged at the finance review stage. But the order had an expedited approval stamp. Signed by Zhao Wei. Another one. An equipment lease contract from earlier this year. The contracting party was a company registered at the end of last year with only 500,000 in registered capital. Also signed off by Zhao Wei under expedited approval. I organized everything into a 16-page document. Attached the vendor association map, price comparison tables, and screenshots of the 2 abnormal approval timestamps from the finance system. When I finished, it was past 2 in the morning. I sat in the CEO office, a cup of cold tea beside me, screen light washing over my face. Outside, the city was silent, like a picture with the volume turned down. I closed the laptop and rubbed my eyes. Tomorrow, the quarterly executive meeting. Those 16 pages would be on every attendee's desk. The quarterly executive meeting was scheduled for Thursday at 9 a.m. Big conference room, 23 people around the long table, Feiyue management, plus a few StarTech liaisons. Han Lu sat in the back, representing HR, with a stack of documents in front of her that looked like a quarterly personnel report. Zhao Wei sat third from the left on the long side, directly across from me. He wore a light blue shirt, collar perfectly buttoned. His face wore that default mask of a capable middle manager, no excess emotion. He even cracked a joke with the person next to him before the meeting started. Light, professional. I sat at the head of the table. Shinbanian wasn't here today. He'd said, "You're in charge now. Don't expect me to clean up after you." In front of me was a stack of folders. The one on top had a blank cover. Inside were pages I'd memorized at least 10 times the night before. The first 20 minutes went as usual. Project updates, financial summary, HR updates. Each department head reported. When Zhao Wei's turn came, he went through operations data. Clear, methodical, solid. A few people nodded along. When he finished and closed his folder, he added, Q2 target, 5-point increase in channel penetration. Confident, like nothing was wrong. When he sat down, I pushed the blank-covered folder to the center of the table and opened it to the first page. Mr. Zhao, I said, since you're done, could you spare a few minutes to explain a few things? I turned the folder toward the projector. The first page went up on the big screen. A vendor association map. Red lines connected 7 suppliers into a web. At the center of the web, a name in bold. Lu Min, legal representative of Ruiqing Materials. I looked at Zhao Wei. This person's phone number matches the household registration details of your family members. Mr. Zhao, can you explain this connection? The room went quiet. Like being underwater. Everyone could see that map on the screen. A web of red lines. A hunting net. Zhao Wei looked at me. The composed mask on his face underwent a visible collapse in that moment. From confusion to alarm, to the tension of someone cornered. That's my wife's cousin. She runs a small business. What about these two? I turned to the second page. A price comparison chart for server parts procurement. Market average as a flat blue line. Ruiqing Materials quote as a red bar shooting upward. The markup was highlighted. 39.7%. Beside it, a screenshot from the finance system showing the expedited approval record. The approver line clearly read Zhao Wei, and this one. Third page, the equipment lease contract. A comparison of the contracting party's registration date and capital against the contract amount. A company registered less than 2 months ago with 500K capital that's signing a 4M lease. Approver, Zhao Wei. Zhao Wei's lips moved. He closed his folder slowly, like he was buying time to think. But after 10 seconds of silence, no words came. He sat there, hands on the table, knuckles turning white. Mr. Zhao. I closed my folder, leaned back, and looked at him. Explain it to everyone here. 3 million in procurement from a supplier owned by your cousin. 4 million in leasing from a company with no track record. Did you audit their qualifications before signing? The room was so quiet I could hear the wall clock ticking. Zhao Wei's face cycled through colors under the lights. Pale, flushed, then ashen. His lips opened and closed, producing broken syllables that didn't form sentences. Then his chair scraped against the floor as he stood, slowly, like his knees were weighted down. And then he dropped to his knees. The thud of his knees hitting the floor was muffled but unmistakable in the silence. He bent his head, hands braced on the floor on either side. His back was to everyone in the room. His shoulders shook, not much, but visibly, like something inside him had shattered and was leaking out. Someone gasped. Someone looked away. Han Lu's pen dropped onto the table with a click. She didn't pick it up. I stayed seated, watching Zhao Wei's kneeling figure in the middle of the conference room. His light blue shirt was still perfectly pressed. The hem hung down, spreading over the floor. Mr. Jiang, His voice came out hoarse from beneath his lowered head. I made a mistake. Those suppliers. I took kickbacks. How much? 80. 90,000. Over time. And the expedited approvals. The normal process wouldn't have passed them. The prices were too high. Oh, you know what this is. A pause. His shoulders shook harder. His voice was barely squeezed out. Yes. Embezzlement. I stood up. My chair made a soft sound against the floor. I walked around the table and stopped in front of Zhao Wei. Looked down at him. He knelt there, the white hairs at the crown of his head visible in the light. A small patch of scalp showing between. He looked older than when I'd first met him 5 years ago. You don't have to kneel. I bent down, reached for his arm, and pulled him up. His body was heavy, like waterlogged wood. I used some strength and got him to his feet. He stood slumped, shoulders curved, eyes fixed on the floor. I let go and stepped back, resigned. Quietly. Return what you took. I won't pursue it further. He looked up, eyes red, lips trembling. The crisp image of a capable manager had crumbled completely. He opened his mouth and managed 2 words. Thank you. Go process the paperwork. He turned and walked out. His steps faltered at the door. He caught the frame to steady himself. The door closed behind him. The room stayed quiet. Everyone still frozen in their seats. The vendor association map still glowed on the screen. Red lines leaving faint afterimages on every retina. I walked back to my seat and sat down. Turned off the projector. The screen went blank white. That's all for today. Meeting adjourned. People started moving. Chair legs scraping. Some hurried out. Some packed their things and glanced at me before looking away. When the room had mostly emptied, Hanlu was still sitting there. Her pen was still on the table. She picked it up, capped it, and put it back in her holder. Then she stood and walked over to me. She wore a light beige knit cardigan today, hair in a low ponytail, more relaxed than usual. She stood on the other side of the table, across the spread of documents. Zhao Wei's situation. How long have you been looking into it? She asked. Since I took over. You knew he had issues, suspected. No evidence. It took me a month to connect the dots. She leaned against the table, looking at me. Her gaze was different now. Where before there had been that why don't you fight harder scrutiny. Now there was something quieter, more even. When I saw Zhao Wei kneel today, I remembered something. She said, you used to go out drinking every Friday night. You said it was with Shin Dong. You always came back smelling like alcohol. I asked what you talked about. You said just old stuff. Yeah. I said, Uncle Shun is my father's friend. He used to invite me to dinner. Nothing major. 2 acquaintances' sons having a drink. I thought you were just going for a free meal. She looked down at her own hands. Now I think he was setting the stage all along. He knew Fei Yue couldn't last much longer. He knew you'd eventually take over. He was telling you about the questionable things one by one. Zhao Wei's situation, that you heard about it from him first. Didn't you? He said questionable. I said, I did the rest myself. Hanlu nodded. She was quiet for a moment, then said something I hadn't expected. I used to say you had no fight in you. That someone could step on your face, and you wouldn't even flinch. Yeah. You said that. I was wrong. She looked up at me. You've got fight. You just keep it where nobody can see. While everyone else is making noise on stage, you're sharpening your blade in the wings. And when it's ready, you stand up. I leaned back in my chair and looked at her. Sunlight streamed through the blinds, striping her shoulder with thin bands of gold. She stood there. The same woman from the lobby. The conference room doorway. The signing ceremony hall. But different. The way she looked at me now was more equal. Side by side. You never gave me a chance to show you those things. I said. I know. She said. I will now. Just the 2 of us left in the conference room. Outside, birdsong drifted in from somewhere. Spring afternoon. I stood up, picked up the blank-covered folder, and closed it. Let's go. It's noon. She made a quiet sound of acknowledgement, packed her things, and followed me out. The hallway was bright with sunlight, stretching our shadows long on the floor. Shoulder to shoulder. 2 weeks after Zhao Wei left, word came from StarTech. Some board members had raised concerns about me. Shin Banian delivered the news. He dropped by my office that afternoon, set a cup of tea on the desk, and walked a slow lap around the room, first admiring the view outside, then the calligraphy on the wall. Then he turned to me. Your father can't hold them off anymore. Hold what off? Several old directors sent a joint letter. Core position appointments require board approval. They're calling for a re-evaluation of your qualifications. Shin Banian leaned against the windowsill, hands in his pockets. They're saying you're practicing nepotism. You've been here a month. Got rid of the ops director. Overhauled the tech team with your own people. They think you're cleaning out Fei Yue's old guard to make room for StarTech. The tech team changes were architectural optimization. Zhao Wei was embezzling. Have they checked? Whether they checked doesn't matter. Shin Banian shrugged. What matters is the vote. StarTech's board has 9 seats. Your father has majority control. Sure, but he still has to go through procedure with those old-timers. After the letter went out, a few votes have already shifted. Your father called me yesterday. He said. Shin Banian paused. He said for you to step down. Lay low. I leaned back in my chair and said nothing. Outside, the sky was overcast. Clouds low. It looked like rain. He wants me to move to group technical advisor. I said. A figurehead. Shin Banian nodded. He said to make a show of it for now. Wait until things blow over. And then, Uncle Sean. I cut him off. Do you believe that he looked at me? Those old directors aren't acting on procedural correctness. They chose this moment deliberately. I stood and walked to the window. They're not afraid I'm CEO of Feyue. They're afraid I'll one day take my father's seat. Because I'm not on their chessboard. I wasn't brought up through their ranks. I won't cut them in. So they want to cut me down while I'm still at Feyue. Shin Banian straightened and came to stand beside me. He looked out at the gray sky. After a long moment, he asked, what are you going to do? I'll step down. He turned his head. Dad told me to step down. So I will. I said, but, Uncle Shun, the tech architecture refactor at Feyue has already started. That system is built on my proprietary code. If I take it and build something separate, it's technically independent, not touching Feyue's patents. I've checked with legal. Shin Banian listened quietly. His expression stayed neutral. But behind those old fox eyes, something flickered, then dimmed. You want to start over? If the board won't let me stay at Feyue, I'll leave. I turned to face him. But I won't go alone. The core team comes with me. 21 of those 37 tech people I've known since I started. They trust me. They stayed when I came. They'll go when I leave. Shin Banian was quiet for a long time. Then he reached out and patted my shoulder. Warm palm. Steady pressure. You're more resourceful than your father was back then, he said. When they cornered him, he just tried to push through. You're the type to pick up a different board after they've already made their move, Uncle Shun. Will you help me? He looked at me, and a small smile crept across his face. Your father hadn't even finished his drink when he asked me to pass you that message. What do you think he meant? I thought for a moment. He's handing me a ladder. Exactly. Shin Banian nodded. He said step down, not step out. He means, once you're out from under the board's rules, you can do whatever you want. They can't touch what you do outside as technical advisor. That evening, I called Jiang Hongyan. He picked up, his voice sounding tired. Like he'd just come out of a long meeting. Dad. Yeah, Uncle Shin told me. What do you think? I looked out at the night city from the 20th floor. Streetlights and taillights blurred into a warm amber current. I'll step down, but the tech system I built. I'm taking it out. Feyue's core team is with me. A pause on the line. Then Jiang Hongyan's voice came through, with a faint, quiet note. Something like pride, carefully contained. When did you decide this? The day you announced me as CEO. I knew it wouldn't last. Then why did you take it so those 37 people could see that Jiang Chang could stand on a stage? I said, they trust the person who stands there. If I'd just been a behind-the-scenes advisor from the start, they wouldn't have followed. Jiang Hongyan was silent on the line for a long time. Then he said, you're walking a harder path than I did. Every step is planned, and every step is being watched. Used to it. I said, I've lived my whole life in other people's eyes. Before, nobody saw me, but the eyes were still there. Now I'm seeing that it's actually easier. At least I don't have to hide anymore. Tomorrow, the board issues the formal notice. I'll sign it. Just go through the motions. Okay. Before hanging up, he said my name again. Jiang Cheng. Yeah. Your mother would be proud. I stood by the window, phone in hand, in the glass. My reflection looked back. Clear in the mix of night and indoor light. The line of my mouth was straight but soft. I said quietly, thank you, and hung up. A month later, I was officially removed as CEO of Feyue Technology, reassigned to StarTech Group Technical Advisor. The public announcement was carefully worded. Due to strategic realignment, no mention of the old director's joint letter, no mention of factional infighting. Everything was clean and civil. The afternoon the announcement went out, my phone blew up again. Former colleagues, industry contacts, recruiters. Messages rained in like a downpour. All variations of Mr. Jiang. Heard you got moved. What now? I didn't reply. I turned my phone face down on the desk. Then I called Shin Banian and a few old tech colleagues to dinner. Same Huayang restaurant on the west side. Small private room. 8 people squeezed in. Before the food even came, an old tech lead named Lao Song couldn't hold it in anymore. He put down his tea and said, Jiang Gu, what's your actual plan? Give me something eat. I put a piece of steamed sea bass in his bowl. That I'm not talking about that. We heard you got removed. Removed is a fact. I put down my chopsticks. But I'm not out. I'll tell you straight. I'm starting my own company. Tech Direction complements FAUS. No non-compete conflict. Those who want to join, welcome. Those who don't, I understand. Lao Song stared for a second, then exchanged glances with the people next to him. About 5 seconds of silence. Then he drained his teacup in one gulp and said, I'm in. The ash-gray-haired K.I.D. Lu Yuan pulled out his phone and set it on the table. Jiang, send me the new company's registration address. I'll be there tomorrow. 7 people at the table. 6 nodded. 1 hesitated, then said, Jiang, my kid's starting elementary school next month. Transferring schools might take a while. In no rush. I smiled at him. Get your family settled first. I don't need a full team immediately. Stay at FAUF for now. Come over when you're ready. I'll keep your spot. His eyes reddened. He didn't say anything, just raised his glass and took a sip. That dinner ran late. When we finally broke up, Lao Song was a little drunk. He slung an arm around my shoulder and said, Jiang, you're too damn patient. I said, when I couldn't be patient. I was. Now that I can be. It doesn't feel hard. He slapped my back 3 times, burped, and stumbled off into the night. I stood outside the restaurant hailing a cab. The night breeze carried the first hints of early summer. Warm. Damp. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. A message from an unknown number. Mr. Jiang, someone at FAUA has been checking your technical proposals today. Subtle, but I saw it. They might be looking for holes in your non-compete. I didn't have the number saved. I replied, thanks. Who's this? The response came back with a smiley face. That accountant from your old department. I locked the screen. The night breeze lifted the hem of my shirt and let it fall. Non-compete loopholes. FAUA's employment contract did have a non-compete clause, but it only covered areas that directly competed with the company's core business. My new company's direction was technology enablement. Upstream from FAUA's hardware products. Not competing. Legal had cleared it months ago. No issue. But they didn't know that. They probably thought I was panicking. That I was stealing. I smiled a little as I got into the cab. Streetlights rolled past outside, slicing the dark sky into alternating patches of light and shadow. I leaned back and watched them flow across my face. Tomorrow. Registering the new company. I'd already chosen the name. Jiangxing Jiang, as in the river. Xing, as in moving forward. A river that keeps flowing. Doesn't stop. Doesn't turn back. Jiangxing Technologies registration went faster than I expected. I used an agency with expedited processing. From name approval to business license. 5 days. The office was in a co-working space on the south side. I leased a window-facing section of the floor. Monthly rent wasn't high, and the light was excellent. Registered capital, 3 million. 1 million of it was savings from my years at FAUA. The other 2 million I borrowed from Shinbanian. He'd sent the transfer with a note. Don't pay it back. Count it as my investment. I replied, it's a loan. Interest at bank rate. The day the license came through, I went to the space alone. Windows clean. Desks empty. Sunlight pouring in across the bare floor. I stood in that sunlight and pulled the license from its envelope. Reading it once. The company's name printed in the center. Regular script. Crisp and clear. I taped it to the wall. Stepped back 2 paces. And looked at it. Then I pulled out my phone. Took a photo. And sent it to Shinbanian. Lao Song. And the others. Shinbanian replied with a string of clapping emojis. Lao Song. What time tomorrow? Lu Yuan. Jiang. I called dibs on the window seat. Nobody else take it. The next morning at 8. Lao Song showed up before I did. He brought his own laptop, an ergonomic chair, and claimed the second window spot. At 8:30, Lu Yuan arrived with a backpack containing 2 monitors. He went straight to the first window seat, set up his monitors, connected his laptop, and within 5 minutes had a fully functional workstation. Then more people trickled in. 1, 2, 3. By 10, 16 of the 22 desks were occupied. The other 6 had their reasons for not being able to join immediately, but each had messaged, Jiang, I'll come as soon as things settle here. From empty to nearly full in less than 2 weeks. At the same time. The old guard inside StarTech was mobilizing. Their method was direct. Pressure Jiang Hongyan to have the group's legal department launch a non-compete investigation against Jiangxing Technology. Grounds. Jiang Cheng had taken the core team from FAUA, allegedly violating non-compete and trade secret provisions. The joint letter was artfully worded. Watertight. Clearly drafted by a specialized law firm. Jiang Hongyan forwarded the letter to me. I read it in the small meeting room at the co-working space, set the phone on the table, and looked at the young lawyer I'd just hired across from me. Her name was Shin Tong, only 27, but sharp. Shin Bonian's recommendation. She read the letter, pushed up her glasses, and said, Mr. Jiang, I reviewed the non-compete clause in advance. They won't catch you there. But the trade secrets part that Feyue timestamped their source code, and your new code resembles any of those marked sections. You could be in trouble. My new code is written from scratch. I said, not a line of Feyue's old code. What about your private repos? The optimization proposals you submitted under your personal account while at Feyue. Those timestamp earlier than Feyue's current core code base. They were extracted from an old version and refactored. Legally, the ideas predate Feyue's current version. They were never released under the company's name. That's independent or done in my personal time. Shintong looked at me and slowly smiled. Mr. Jiang, how long have you been preparing for this? That I wasn't preparing. It was already there. I leaned back in my chair. I used to work on that code every night. Never thought I'd use it for this. But it was always there. Good. She put her phone away. If they send a formal letter, I'll handle the response. Make sure not a single page of theirs makes it into court. Great. She walked out. I sat in the meeting room a little longer, looking through the glass at the co-working space. 16 people sat at their desks, code and documents scrolling on their screens. The clatter of keyboards was steady, organized. Lao Song stood up, gesturing at a whiteboard with Lu Yuan. Sketching, erasing, sketching again. The whole space hummed with a fresh, sandpapery energy. I picked up my phone and looked at the joint letter again. Words on a page. Black stones placed on a board, waiting for a move. But they didn't know the player was no longer on the board. I stood up and walked out. As I passed Lu Yuan's desk, he said without looking up, Jiang Gu, take a look at this distributed lock. I leaned over, glanced at his screen, and drew 2 lines. He said, got it, and went back to typing. I stood behind him for a few seconds, then returned to my own desk, opened my laptop, and started a new technical document that the architecture design for Jiangxing Technology's first product. The call from Jiang Hongyan came 3 days later. His voice was faster than usual. Like he'd just come from a tense meeting, the old guard formally raised the joint letter at the board meeting. They're demanding legal launch and investigation. I approved it procedurally. But Shin Tong submitted counter-evidence that compare your private repo timestamps with Feyue's code. After they saw it, they went quiet. They accepted it. Accepted, technically. But they're still saying procedural questions remain. Jiang Hongyan's voice carried a thin edge of contempt. Procedure. That's all they can say, Dad. I said, how much longer are you going to play this game with them? A pause on the line. I've been at StarTech for over a decade. I've been running circles around these people for over a decade. It's not that I can't outlast them. I just don't want it anymore. His voice dropped, carrying a weariness I rarely heard. How's Jiangxing doing? Core team of 16. First product prototype next month. I'm stepping down from the group. I stopped walking in the middle of the co-working aisle. Phone pressed to my ear. He said it without preamble, like lifting a cloth that had been covering something for a long time. What? I said that I'm stepping down. Jiang Hongyan's tone was calm. I've been holding the old guard off for years. It's not that they're strong. I'm just tired. StarTech has been treading water for the last 3 years because of these internal checks and balances. No one letting anyone else move. After seeing what you've done, I realized, rather than burning out on internal friction, I'll clear the seat. Let them fight over it. When they've had enough, when they've worn themselves out, I'll come back and clean up. They won't be talking about procedure then. I leaned against the office wall, glancing out the window. The afternoon sun was harsh, bleaching the glass of the neighboring buildings into a sheet of white. Dad, I said, how long have you been waiting? Until you came. His voice warmed slightly. I walked away for 30 years to find you. Now you're here. I don't need to carry all this meaningless weight anymore. When are you announcing? Next month's board meeting. I hung up and stood in the aisle for a moment. Lao Song passed by with a coffee, saw me standing still, and glanced over. Everything okay, yeah? I said, my dad's retiring. Lao Song looked at me for a second, then patted my arm without saying anything and walked on. Next month's board meeting. The same month Jiangxing's first prototype was set to land. 2 events running in parallel on the same timeline, like 2 streams splitting and then rejoining at a bend. I looked down at the last message Jiang Hongyan had sent. Your company name. Jiangxing means walking. I replied. It means walking. It also means moving forward. He replied. Good. I locked the screen and walked back to my desk. The cursor blinked on the screen above my keyboard. A quiet, unbroken path. I put my hands on the keyboard and kept typing. The day Jiangxing Technologies prototype came together. No one had planned to stay late. But somehow, everyone did. Lao Song was stuck on the final integration module. When the screen finally flashed green, he threw himself back in his chair, let out a long exhale, shoved the keyboard away, and said, "It's done." Liu Yuan leaned over from his adjacent desk, looked at Lao Song's screen, and reached over for a fist bump. Then others gathered around. 16 people crowding behind Lao Song's desk, looking at the data streams and parameter curves scrolling across the screen. I stood at the edge of the group, not pushing in. I watched the backs of those people. Some in plaid shirts, some in hoodies. Liu Yuan with hair still ash gray at the ends, but growing out black at the roots. They filled the space, each face carrying the same expression, something between exhaustion and relief. Not quite processed yet. All right. I clapped my hands. Early day today. We'll pick it up tomorrow. N01 moved. Lao Song turned his head. Jianggu. Celebration. Are you buying or not? I looked at him for 3 seconds, then pulled out my phone. Let's go. Skewer place down the street. Unlimited. The space erupted in cheers. That night, the 16 of us packed around the big round table at the skewer shop. Beer bottles lined up from one end to the other. Someone got drunk and started singing. Someone passed out on the table. Someone threaded a bunch of skewers together and wore them like a crown, declaring himself the skewer king. Lao Song grabbed my arm toward the end, slurring, "Jianggu, I really thought you were screwed. I'm not screwed. I know you're not. But none of us ever thought we'd end up like this. I thought for a second. I didn't either. When we finally broke up, it was almost midnight. I stood outside the skewer shop, watching the last colleague climb into a cab. The night breeze hit my face. Warm, carrying the lingering smell of charcoal from the grill. I exhaled and was about to call a ride when my phone lit up. Han Lu's message. You're back late tonight. Company outing. You go to sleep. She replied. I'm at your office building. I blinked. Jiangxing's co-working space was on the south side, a good 30-minute drive from our apartment. She wouldn't be there at midnight for no reason. I called her. She picked up. There was wind in the background. Definitely outside. What are you doing there? You said the prototype was done today. I wanted to see it. A pause. I'm at the convenience store downstairs from your office. Can you come down? I grabbed a cab back. When I arrived, Han Lu was standing under the convenience store light, wearing a light jacket, hair loose, carrying a plastic bag. She saw me get out of the car and held up the bag. Brought some late-night snacks. Thought you guys might be working late. We had skewers. Then it's breakfast for tomorrow. I walked over and stood beside her on the convenience store steps. The street was quiet. The streetlight cast a warm yellow glow around us, like a small, cozy bubble. She tilted her head and looked up at the building across the street. A few windows lit. Which one's your desk? She asked. 4th floor. Window side. 3rd from the left. The one with the succulent. She looked for a while, then said, I've never visited any office you worked at. 8 years at Feiyue. I never once went up to that building. You said we weren't in the same system. It would be awkward. I'm in HR, she said, glancing at me. I could have gone anywhere. I just never thought to. She set the plastic bag on the steps, put her hands in her jacket pockets, and looked out at the street. The early summer breeze came down from the end of the block. Soft, carrying the scent of growing grass. You never asked me to, I said. She turned her head and looked at me. The streetlight outlined her profile in warm tones. Her expression was different now. The "are you good enough" scrutiny was gone, replaced by something softer, like a window pushed open just a crack, letting light in. I'll come now, she said. Besides, I don't really want to stay at my current job anyway. You mean Feiyue's HR department? Yeah? She looked down at the ground near her shoes. After the acquisition, the atmosphere changed. A lot of the old staff left. I don't know the new people. I used to think that place was a ladder I was climbing. Now, she paused. Now I feel like the ladder ends. And I don't know where to go from there. Didn't you get a recruiter's offer? 3 times the pay? She looked at me with some surprise. How did you know that? You mentioned it when you were deciding whether to take it. She was quiet for a few seconds, then looked down. I turned it down. Why? She thought for a moment, then said, because that VP of HR position. From the outside, it looked different from Feiyue's VP slot. But it would have been the same thing. Sitting at a desk, managing people I don't know, working for a boss I don't know. I used to think as long as the money was right, it was fine. Now I think that no matter how high you sit, If there's no one you care about next to you, it's pretty empty. The convenience store light wrapped her in a warm circle. I looked at the line of her profile and remembered the photo she'd taken at graduation 7 years ago. She was looking at the camera sideways, mouth curved, light in her eyes. She'd said, "Jiang Chung, let's stay in Beijing together." 7 years. We didn't end up in Beijing, but she was still beside me. We'd taken some detours, but she was here now, at my new office's convenience store, carrying a bag of late-night snacks, saying she thought sitting high up with no one beside you is pretty empty. Han Lu, I said, do you want to come to Jiangxing? She turned to me that we need someone for HR and admin. It's not an executive position, but it would help me keep the team together. The pay might be less than what you make now, but there's someone beside you. And those people, I nodded toward the lit windows upstairs. You didn't meet them tonight. They're interesting. She looked at me for a long time. Under the streetlight, her eyes shimmered like a lake's surface stirred by wind, then smoothing out. Then her mouth curved. She picked up the plastic bag and handed it to me. Take this upstairs first. Tomorrow, I'll come see the office. I took the bag. It was heavy. Inside, a few containers of Odin, 2 bottles of oolong tea, a bag of peanuts. All my favorites. Let's go up, I said. She nodded. We went inside together. In the elevator, she leaned against the wall, watching the floor numbers tick up. When it hit 4, she said, "What's your new company called?" Jiangxing. Jiang as in the river. Xing as in moving. She stepped out first when the doors opened. The hallway light came on, illuminating the glass door at the end, slightly ajar. Warm light and the faint breathing glow of monitors on standby filtered through the crack. She pushed the door open and walked inside, slowly making a circuit through the empty office. Past Lu Yuan's desk. Lao Song's, the whiteboard with the product roadmap, the succulent I'd brought in 2 weeks ago. She stopped by the window and looked out at the expanse of South Side night. Then she said, very quietly, "This place is nice. Not finished yet, doesn't need to be." She turned to face me, hands resting on the windowsill, more relaxed than she'd been all evening. "Smaller's fine. You started small before." I stood in the center of the office, looking at her across the row of empty desks. The city night spread behind her like a dark field scattered with glimmers. She stood there, same as when I first met her. Profile, ponytail, slight upward curve of her mouth, and different too. Back then, her eyes held only her own path. Now they held my desk, my succulent, the logo I'd just put up for Jiangxing Technology. "Are you staying here tonight?" I asked. "I'll take a cab back. I'll take you." She shook her head. "Go check if that Odin's cold yet. It won't be good cold." At the door, she turned and looked at me. "Jiang Chung, what time do you get in tomorrow?" 8:30. "I'll be here at 8." As she left, the glass door closed behind her. Her footsteps faded down the hallway. I stood alone in the office, pulled the Odin out of the bag, popped the lid. The broth was still warm. I stood by the window, holding the container, and watched Han Lu's figure appear under the streetlight below. She walked a few steps, then turned and looked up toward the building. I waved from the window. She probably couldn't see me. But she paused for a moment, then kept walking. The early summer breeze drifted in through the cracked window, warm and carrying the scent of wet greenery. I took a bite of fishball, broth hot, fishball springy, warming all the way down. The next morning at 8, Han Lu arrived. White blouse, dark gray trousers, hair pulled back neatly. She stood at the entrance for a moment. I waved her in from inside. She walked in and set her bag on the desk beside mine. Empty for a week. "This spot taken. Saved for you." She sat down, wiped the desk, and laid out her things one by one. Pen holder, notebook, a tiny cactus. Her movements were unhurried, like she was doing something she'd thought about for a while, but never had the chance. Lao Song came in at 8:30 and saw Han Lu sitting next to me. He blinked. "Jiang Gu. And this is my wife," I said. "She'll be handling HR and admin." Lao Song looked from Han Lu to me, then extended his hand. "Nice to meet you. I'm Lao Song." Tech. Han Lu stood and shook his hand. "Nice to meet you. I'll handle desk assignments, benefits, paid leave. Tech issues belong to your Mr. Jiang." Lao Song laughed. "Got it. Clear division of labor." Lu Yuan arrived second. He saw Han Lu's spot, looked between me and her a couple of times, then quietly put his bag down at his own desk. As he Saturday, he gave me a thumbs up. The atmosphere that morning was different from the month before. One more person, one more desk, one more lit lamp. Han Lu answered calls. Assigned desks. Coordinated with property management on AC repairs. Efficient. Clear. She called across the office. "Jiang Chung, where's the printer cable?" "Over there." I went to help her find it. We crouched under the desk, searching through cables, and bumped heads. She rubbed her forehead and said, "Your head's too hard." I said, "You never said that before." She said, "I never had the chance to bump heads with you." Lu Yuan's voice drifted over from his desk. "Jiang, take it back to your own desks. Some of us are trying to code over here." Han Lu stood up, pulled a bag of chips from her drawer, and tossed it at him. "Eat these." And shut up. Lu Yuan caught the chips, ripped them open, crunched. "Shut up." Lao Song was laughing so hard, he almost knocked his keyboard off the desk. I crouched under the desk, straightened the cable, and handed it up. Han Lu's fingers brushed mine as she took it. Warm. She didn't pull away. Her fingers lingered a moment longer. I looked up. In the sunlight, she smiled. The cable connected. The screen lit up. The Jiangxing logo sat quietly in the lower right corner of the desktop. Outside, the early summer sky was crisp and blue. The day Jiangxing Technology's first product went live was in late autumn. For months after the prototype landed. 8 months after I was removed from Feiyue. A little over a year since Han Lu had asked me what I was going to do after being laid off. The night before launch, the whole office was lit up. Lao Song tweaked the last interface parameters. Lu Yuan fixed a tiny front-end display bug. Han Lu ordered takeout for everyone. I sat at my desk, watching the back-end monitoring dashboard. The curves on the screen were steady, like a calm EKG.AT3 in the morning. Lu Yuan finished his bug fix. He slumped in his chair, said, "I'm out," and was actually out. Passed out at his desk. Lao Song finished his parameters, went to the break room for more coffee, and patted my shoulder on his way back. "Jiang, you should get some sleep. I'll monitor until 6. Alright. I'll crash on the couch. One by one. People peeled off. Finally, just me and Han Lu left. She hadn't slept either. She was sitting at her desk next to mine, an unopened book in front of her. Outside, the late autumn night was at its blackest just before dawn. Streetlights glowed in the mist like small orange halos. "You're not sleeping?" I asked. "Neither are you. I'm watching the system." "Then I'll watch with you." I didn't say anything. Neither did she. We sat side by side, me watching the data, her leaning back, occasionally sipping cold tea. The office hummed with server fans and the occasional distant hum of a car passing. AT6.15. The user count curve started climbing. First a few test account logins, then links from the closed beta user group, then organic traffic beginning its slow uphill crawl. The line didn't climb fast, but every step was solid. I watched it for about 10 minutes, until it plateaued at a steady slope. Then I leaned back and let out a long breath. Beside me, Han Lu asked, "Done?" "Done." She closed her unopened book, stood, and stretched. Then she walked to the window and pulled up the blinds. Outside, the sky had just turned bright. Late autumn dawn, a thin layer of gold spreading across the room. She stood in that light and waved me over. "Come see this." I walked over and stood beside her at the window. The south side of the city was waking up. Cars started to fill the streets. Steam rose from breakfast stalls. On the distant overpass, headlights flowed in a slow, fluid chain. She looked at me and said, "At Feiyue, did you pull all-nighters like this often? More than this? What were you thinking about?" Back then, I thought for a moment. I was thinking what happens after I finish it. And now I know. I said, looking out at the city coming to life below. People on scooters, old people walking dogs, office workers hurrying across crosswalks with briefcases. Finish it, and people use it. People use it, and the path opens. She turned her head and looked at me. Morning light fell on her profile. The lines that used to crease her brow had smoothed. Her jaw was softer than before. She didn't say anything. She just reached out and touched the back of my hand with hers. I took her hand and held it. 3 weeks after launch, word came from StarTech. Zhang Hongyan was in the hospital. Shinbanian called. His voice was more rushed than usual. "Your dad's blood pressure spiked. They admitted him last night. Doctors said exhaustion, plus stress. At his age, it doesn't take much." I dropped everything and went to the hospital. Zhang Hongyan was lying in a private room, wearing blue and white hospital pajamas, and 4 drip in his hand, pale, but still sharp-eyed. When he saw me come in, he blinked, then smiled. "Who told you?" "Shinbanian. He's got a big mouth. You're lying in a hospital bed, and he's not supposed to tell me. Just a small spike." He shifted in the bed. "Not a big deal." I sat in the chair beside the bed and looked at his hand resting on the blanket. The 4 needle was taped in place, a faint blue bruise spreading under the skin. His hand looked thinner than the last time we'd had dinner, knuckles more prominent. I reached over and pulled the blanket up to cover his shoulder. Dad, I said, Jiangxing's product is live. His eyes brightened. How's it going? Good. First week users in the top 3 among similar products. Better than I expected. He leaned back and looked out the window. You've got yours going. Now I need to clean up the mess on my side. What mess? He turned his head. Behind that tired look was something still solid. Those old directors think they've won. They think I'm out. Down. Can't control them anymore. You know what StarTech has been like these past 3 months? Infighting. Factions. Projects stalled. Stock down nearly 20%. Shareholders are already screaming. When are you going back? Not going back. He looked at me. I'm sending you back. I leaned back in the chair and looked at him. When your next round of product data comes in next month, I'll call a shareholder meeting. The old guard's terms are ending. I'm nominating a new slate of independent directors. People I've vetted. Half are industry veterans. Half institutional reps. They'll vote on a new management plan. He paused. The core of that plan. I was silent for about 10 seconds. The room was quiet enough to hear the drip of the 4. 1 drop. 2. 3. Dad, I said. How long have you been planning this? He reached under his pillow, pulled out a folded document, and handed it to me. I opened it. It was a detailed plan for board seat restructuring. Each name was annotated with background, voting expectations, and communication status. The last page had a timeline starting from the day I was removed as Feiyue CEO, running to next spring. Every step hit a milestone. Since the day you were removed, he said. What I said at Feiyue was true. I'm tired. But those old guard idiots aren't ruining the company I built while I still have breath in me. I just don't want to fight them myself anymore. So I found someone else to do it. You found me. I didn't find you. He looked at me. You're my son. I looked down at the document, then back up at him. Sunlight streamed in through the window, catching the silver in his hair. He leaned back on the pillow, the forehand resting on the blanket. He looked weaker than usual, but that light in his eyes was still there. Okay, I said. Next month, the following month. After Jiangxing's second round product data came out, I got a call from Shenbanian on a Thursday afternoon. Your dad's moving. The next day, I sat in StarTech's shareholder meeting hall. It was at StarTech headquarters. Twice the size of Feiyue's. Seats arranged in neat rows. A podium and seats on the dais. I sat in the 3rd row. Aisle seat. Shenbanian beside me. The room filled with a couple hundred people. Institutional reps, independent directors, a few old faces I'd seen but never spoken to. Jiang Hongyan sat in the center seat on the dais, wearing a dark gray suit. A small piece of white tape still clung to the back of his hand. The mark from the 4 removal. He looked out at the room, face calm. The first half of the meeting was standard agenda. Financial reports, operational summaries, audit opinions. Someone raised pointed questions about the operating data, laced with barbs, blaming the management's incompetence. Jiang Hongyan didn't respond directly. When the speaker finished, he simply said, Noted. We'll address that in a dedicated session later. Then he stood, adjusted the microphone. When he spoke, his voice wasn't loud, but the room went quiet. I've been chairman of StarTech for 16 years. He said, 16 years isn't a short time. We've had rough patches. We've had highs. The company has struggled lately. Some of it external, some of it internal. He paused. The internal reasons are that some people have forgotten this company is about building products, making things, working with technology. Not fighting over seats, staking territory, and wasting energy on internal battles. The room was silent. A few of the old directors' expressions changed. Today, I'm nominating someone to take over as StarTech's next chairman. Jiang Hongyan's gaze traveled to the 3rd row and landed on me. His name is Jiang Cheng. He's my son, but that's not why I'm nominating him. I'm nominating him because he spent 8 years as a technologist at Feiyue Technology. Because after being laid off, he refactored Feiyue's entire core architecture using his own technical solutions. Because after being removed from the CEO position, he didn't complain that he started his own company and, in less than a year, built a leading product in the industry. The underlying logic of that product, if applied to StarTech's core business, can solve a technology bottleneck we've been stuck on for 3 years. Murmurs started in the room. A gray-haired old director in the front row stood up. I object. Chairman Jiang, nominating a family member that it's compliant. Jiang Hongyan's voice wasn't raised, but it cut through. Nomination process. Qualification review. Independent director recusal. All followed by the book. If you have a formal objection, Mr. Zhang, you're welcome to call a vote. I won't interfere with the count. The old director opened his mouth, then sat down. His face was pale with anger. Jiang Hongyan turned back to the room. Shareholders, I'm not grooming a successor. I'm looking for someone who can solve StarTech's technical bottleneck and lead us forward. If you have a better candidate, nominate them. If not, vote. About 10 seconds of silence. Then a few institutional reps in the corner started talking quietly. A middle-aged woman raised her hand. I support the nomination. I've worked with StarTech for 7 years. This is the first time I've heard someone articulate a technical solution this clearly. Then a second. A third. Votes stacked up like bricks. Clicking into place. I sat in the third row, surrounded by the sound of voices rising and falling like a tide. Shin Banian murmured beside me. That's it. His voice held a relief that had been building for a long time. The vote closed. The teller announced the result. When the number came out, the old director who'd stood up in the front row went from pale to gray. He looked up at Jiang Hongyan on the dais, then at me in the audience. Then he turned away and said nothing. Jiang Hongyan stood at the podium, announced the result, then stepped back and made room. I stood up from the third row and walked to the dais, past all those looks out watching, measuring, weighing. One of the old directors who'd co-signed the joint letter looked away as I passed. Suddenly fascinated by the ceiling lights, I stood behind the podium, holding the microphone for 2 beats. 100 faces spread out before me. A quiet, expansive SEA.my mother taught me 2 things. I said, first, make your own living. Second, don't let the people who hate you win. The room was quiet. Sunlight poured through the windows, warming the podium. Fayuette taught me a third thing. I said, when someone steps on your face, don't fight back immediately. First, wipe your face, straighten your path, walk to where they can't reach, then look back. You'll see they can't reach you anymore. Their voices won't even carry that far. I paused. A quiet energy passed through the room, released and gathered at the same time. Starting tomorrow, I'm StarTech's new chairman. My voice was even, each word landing cleanly in the microphone's pickup range. People who looked down on me before can keep looking down. That's fine. I'm too busy moving forward to look back. 2 seconds of silence. Then applause erupted from somewhere in the corner, like the first firecracker of winter. Then another. It rolled across the room and wrapped around me in a wave of sound. I stood there, didn't wave, didn't smile, just looked at the faces below. Some clapping, some looking down, some with complex expressions, murmuring to each other. The gray-haired man in the front row never clapped. But he didn't leave either. He sat there with his hands folded on his knees, looking at me on the dais. I looked back, then gave a small nod. After the ceremony, the crowd dispersed. As I stepped down from the podium, my legs felt a little weak. Shinbanian came up and steadied me, murmuring, you did fine, but your legs are shaking. I'm not shaking, your arms trembling. He grinned. I smiled and didn't answer. I walked out of the hall. Han Lu was waiting in the lobby. She wore a light, gray knit cardigan today, hair loose, holding a cup of hot tea. I didn't know where she'd gotten it, but it was just the right temperature. When she saw me, she handed it over. You spoke well. You heard. I watched from the little window upstairs. She nodded toward the stairwell on the side. Couldn't squeeze in. Listen. Standing up. I took the tea and drank. Warm liquid slid down my throat, smoothing out the turmoil in my chest. She stood beside me, watching the crowd filter out through the revolving doors. Groups of 2 or 3, talking as they walked. Late autumn sun poured in from the street outside, scattering gold across the floor. Let's go, she said, hoisting her bag onto her shoulder. Let's go home. What do you want for dinner? That braised pork you mentioned last time. I remember there's a place on the west side. 40-minute drive. 40 minutes. Then we walked out together, shoulder to shoulder. The sunlight hit our faces, warm enough to make us squint. I looked back once at the building behind us. Starting today, it was mine. Its blue glass facade reflected the clear autumn sky. The word StarTech on the rooftop gleamed with a muted metallic sheen. I didn't look long. I turned back and followed Han Lu toward the parking lot. Her hand swung at her side, fingers pointing down, like waiting for something to fall into them. I reached over and took it. Her palm was warm. She said, your hand's cold. I said, spring's not here yet. She said, it's coming. Tomorrow. We walked into the light. Behind us, the building stood quietly under the clear sky. Its glass facade reflected 2 figures. Long, thin, lit from behind.